welcome everyone. This is Glenda Dawson, and I have MoonGirl here with me, and you're watching the Paranormal Dolls. We just want to thank the audience for watching us, following us, sharing our podcast, and for any and all emails and messages that you sent to us about proposals of subjects that you want us to cover. And yeah, thank you. And today we have a great guest, don't we, Moon Girl?
Yeah, an amazing guest, of course.
Of course. So, with that being said, welcome, Richard. How are you?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very well, thank you, and I hope you are too.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Today has been a very good day and still going. Perfect. So, tell us a little bit about you.
Sure. Let's see. I come from England, but I've been here in the US for 25 years, I think it will take. Yeah, 25 years this year. I make my living as a paramedic and a clinical educator. And when I'm not doing that, I like to creep around haunted places, writing books about them. And that's me in a nutshell.
Hmm. So, were you able to see ghosts and spirits before you came from England, or when you arrived here is when it started?
Neither. I can't see ghosts and spirits.
Oh,
No,
okay.
investigations.
He does investigations, but I'm saying in your investigations, you feel them, or you just use the equipment. Use the equipment.
Actually, I've never been someone that really feels that kind of thing either. Although I work with people that are a little more that way inclined. I used to be more of a nuts and bolts guy. I was all about what we could measure, what we could find out, what we can get from the history of a location and the people that live there. And since I began writing, I've been more about trying to tell their stories, which is very fulfilling.
Wonderful, wonderful. That is what investigations are. The idea of investigations is supposed to be, so we could tell the story that is untold.
In an
Uh,
ideal world, yes, the focus should be on them, not us.
right, right.
Yes.
So, and how did you start doing that? What made you start investigating?
I've been interested in the paranormal since I was a boy. I grew up in a haunted house that my grandparents owned. Heard ghost stories about that house since I was 3 feet high, and developed that love for ghost stories. There was no paranormal TV back then, so you had to go to the library to learn about this kind of stuff. And
Mhm.
I read every book in the library in the paranormal section, books by people like Harry Price. Let's see who else was there on that list. Andrew Green, two very fascinating British ghost hunters. Peter Underwood, of course, and then across the pond in the States, you had Hans Holzer,
Mhm.
those kind of things. And so I think I read through the entire ghosts and haunting section in my local library 3 or 4 times. Went on to UFOs and cryptids, although they weren't called that then, and so on and so forth. And as I grew older, I finally joined a research society in the UK in the mid-90s, back when they were pretty thin and far on the ground. There weren't as many as there were today. Got into investigating haunted places and have never stopped.
Very good, very good. And now, when you started, was it more? Were was your family with you, or was your family kind of saying, "Oh, you're being silly," or?
I think my family have always been, let's see, um, spouse aside, I think my family has always just said that this is weird, and if it appeals to you, have at it.
Mhm.
My sister takes it in her stride. My brother is in the British military. He's one of the bravest men you could ever meet until you put him in a haunted house. Uh, because if it can't be punched, kicked, stabbed, or shot, then he's scared of it. So he he would rather run at a machine gun nest than he would into a haunted house. So my brother and I are very different in that way.
Okay.
You said you grew up in a haunted house. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, my grandparents' house was haunted by the ghost of an old lady. During the Second World War, my grandfather went to fight overseas, and my grandmother was left to raise the children, which happened to a lot of British women back then, and many of the husbands didn't come home. The with the German Air Force bombing the city at night, it was quite a dangerous and stressful time. And there was an old lady that would visit my aunts and uncles in their bedroom at night and make sure they were safely tucked into bed and that they were ready to sleep. And none of them, being that young age, questioned what was this stranger doing in the house. They just took it in their stride. And it was only when my grandfather returned from Burma after the war, and they all started talking about it, that they realized the children were describing the lady that had lived in the house before them and had died downstairs.
Wow.
And I think, we know spirits sometimes have a mission or an objective. And in her case, I think she saw there was a need just for that kind of watchful guardianship. And once she fulfilled that need, the war was over. My grandfather came home. On she went and never appeared again. But I slept in the bedroom as a boy, and I heard all the stories, and it was I did not have a whole bunch of brothers and sisters with me, so I was kind of terrified and kind of fascinated at the same time.
Yeah, I can imagine after hearing all the stories. So it is intriguing, like you say, that the spirit had that mission and wanted to make sure that it gave the kids extra protection, make them feel safe. Not too many people think about that, and so I'm glad that you brought that point up. Now, when you decided to join the team or the group back in England, did they do it all over the place? Did they investigate all over the place, or was it in like a same town? Or
it was fairly local. We would. It was interesting that people would sometimes call the police when they had a haunting. The police were like, "We don't know. What are we going to do? Are we going to arrest him?"
Arrest the ghost?
Yeah. Sometimes they would call newspapers. Sometimes universities, and we just kind of got out there that if you were having these strange things going on, number one, we would believe you, and number two, we didn't charge, and I've never charged for an investigation in my life, never will. And we were out there at the very least to try and help find answers. So you find yourself being kind of the equivalent of an investigator, a researcher, a social worker, a soldier, a shoulder to cry on, all those kind of things. Because a lot of these
therapists,
therapists to a degree. I mean, these people were often living in fear, and they didn't want to publicize it because of fear of ridicule. Nobody wants to be that house on the block, with their neighbors laughing at them and things like that. So we did a lot of those private help cases, as we called them, the home help cases, and a few other bigger kind of locations as well.
Oh, good. Yes, I've done a lot of private investigations, and I kind of prefer doing that because you actually get to know more of the story, the deep down real story. So I can appreciate that. Now, when you arrived in the U.S. over the pond, did you right away search for another team, or did you kind of wait it? Or?
I let it go for a couple of years just as I was adjusting. I continued to read, and I discovered some American authors that I'd not heard of in England. I mean, people like Troy Taylor, and started reading about U.S. hauntings. That fascinated me. But it took me a couple of years before I finally went back out into the field again. I found a team that I was with for a while before branching out and starting up a venture that was a little more in tune with my values.
Okay.
So how does the writing start up with? How did you begin that?
I think when we investigate hauntings, I'm interested in the story, and I'm interested in they're people, right? They're us. I mean, they're no longer physically around. They're not wearing the meat shell that we are, but they had the same sort of problems or similar problems, the same worries, the same hopes, dreams, aspirations, fears. And I find that fascinating, and I wanted to learn their stories. And then I thought, it's a crying shame that these stories aren't being shared. And so I started out by just kind of telling some of those stories. People, it seemed, wanted to read about them. And so I started writing in 2013. 11 years later, I'm still going, and people, as long as people want to read about these hauntings and things, I will keep writing about them.
Yeah, very good. Has there ever been an experience that really, really frightened you and kind of made you maybe put the brakes on the paranormal for a bit, or no?
I know it's a cliche, but my worst experiences have always been with the living in this field, not the dead.
Oh,
You
especially
know,
in the paranormal field.
I mean, let's not get into paradrama or anything like that, but I'm talking about the guy in the old Wild West mining town that pulled a gun because he thought we were cooking meth in a haunted building. And
Yeah.
I'm like,
Wow.
sir, I weigh 270 pounds. Do I look like I do meth? And things like that. But in terms of the paranormal, I did have something that I brought home once a few years ago, which started to manifest around the house as a disembodied voice, a shadowy figure. Objects started getting knocked off shelves. So I had the house blessed by a good friend of mine, and that resolved the issue. And ever since then, I've been more diligent about protection. About setting those boundaries when I go out to a haunted location.
Have you ever been hurt or pushed or scratched or anything like that?
No, and as long as I've been in what have been described as some of the most haunted places in the world, um, let's just say that I'm very skeptical about the number of so-called possessions and physical attacks that supposedly happen in this field. I think it's massively overplayed, um,
Mm.
and in my experience, those dark, aggressive hauntings do happen, but they are much less common than some people would have us believe.
Hmm. I
Have you
agree.
have you ever debunked a place, like maybe not even on purpose, but you go and you're like, no, I don't believe this place is haunted. It was a pipe or whatever.
I sometimes you do find those explanations. We're always looking for them. I'm hesitant to say not haunted because it can simply be that you're not there at the right time. You're not there.
Hmm.
It's an analogy that I always use is that in my early days on an ambulance, we used to post outside convenience stores quite a lot, because they're open for 24 hours and they have a restroom. And in all that time, I never saw a convenience store get stuck up. I never saw an armed robbery. So
Hmm.
if I were to say convenience stores don't get stuck up, it's crazy. I went to them for
Yeah.
years. I never saw it happen. You're going to look at me strange, and you're
Right.
going to say, well, just because it's never happened to you at the time
Doesn't
you were
mean
there.
that,
So
Right.
that's the analogy I use. So I found places I think were overblown, maybe, or perhaps the haunting had petered out a little bit, had kind of wound down. But I'm very hesitant to say a place isn't haunted. I will say I was not able to find any evidence to support the
yeah.
claim that a place was haunted. But
Hmm.
again, not the same thing as definitively ruling it out.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Hmm. Now, you travel all over the place, and have you found that some places it's easier to um, get evidence than others, or is it like the day? Sometimes, let me explain that. Sometimes people say that it's easier to get more hauntings or evidence at night than it is during the day. I've discovered it. To me, it doesn't matter any time. If they're there,
Hmm.
they're there, and if I'm at the right time, perfect. If not, I'm not. But just wondering, is there? Have you noticed that there's any one time during the day that's easier, or
I think that the main reason so many people investigate at night is number one, we have day jobs, most of us.
right?
Hmm.
And number two, I mean, there's a lot to be said for it in that it's quieter at night. There's less traffic on the roads. There's less electricity flowing through the power grid. Uh, Sound carries further at night. Things are more still, more calm. And then there's that fantastic old stereotype of ghosts come out at night, which we all know is ridiculous. But there are locations that are far more active in the day. I mean, one that springs to mind is the place I just left, Ashmore Estates in Illinois, which was a poor farm for many years. And a poor farm was the kind of place you went if you had no means to support yourself, no family. Maybe you were orphaned or your caregivers died, and it was live there or be on the streets. And you worked the poor farm, so you were up with the sun, as farmers are often before the sun. You're up, at sunrise. You're out working in the fields. You're getting things done, and you're in bed kind of early. So I would say the majority of our good evidence at Ashmore Estates comes before 9 p.m. at night. And then the place seems to go quiet or dormant, which absolutely fits the character of that building, of what it used to be. So I think you have to look at what it is that you're investigating, and what kind of rhythms it had when it was still active, and see when it might, make most sense to spend time there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What about like cryptics and UFOs, aliens? Have you ever personally experienced, or is it just stories you heard?
Cryptids, hold the phone on that. I've never really gone looking for cryptids, but I am working on a book that addresses one of those right now. So I'm in the very early research phases for that. UFOs I find fascinating, especially now when it just feels as though things are really snowballing in that area. I did write a book called Colorado UFOs, where I looked at kind of UFO stories around the state that I adopted, and it was fascinating. But did I find any? No. Again, not to say they aren't a thing, just that they have yet to be a thing for me.
Okay. So you're basically doing for UFOs a lot of research. You're going to do research for cryptics, and people could contact you. They have any stories themselves?
The book on cryptids is about a very specific cryptid.
Okay.
So I'm not casting like a very wide net at the moment. I'm working a very specific case for that book.
Okay.
I do find UFOs fascinating, and I would like to get back into that, but I'm not writing a project about that at the moment. But I am very interested in the way that particular story is unfolding on a global scale.
Okay.
Do you have any theories on that?
Plenty of theories. The question is, which one's right? I think that there are many possible explanations for them. Everything from the classic swamp gas and Venus, we know that that's a thing, but I think there's so many sightings that just defy explanation, because you have multiple eyewitnesses telling a similar story. The question is, what are they? Where do they come from? Now the military is coming out after decades of saying this is not a thing, saying it is in fact a thing, and we've got film of it, and we don't know what it is. So that's a huge admission by the U.S. Department of Defense that something is, to all extents and purposes, violating U.S. airspace. And other countries are saying the same thing. I think Belgium has been the most progressive about it. They've talked about it for years, very openly. They've had UFOs chased by F-16 fighter jets that they weren't able to catch. And so I think it's a little lazy to say it's probably little green men, as the saying goes, right? And women. Could they be extraterrestrial? Sure. Could they be extra dimensional? Sure. Could they be from the future? Maybe. Who knows? I think the jury is very much still out on the UFO phenomenon, and that's what makes it so fascinating.
Yeah.
Because it changes with the times, right? I mean, if you look at the early UFO reports and you see people like George Adamski that claim to have contact with the occupants of these, back then, flying saucers, they told us they had bases on the moon and bases on Venus, and that Venus was this wonderful tropical paradise. And then we sent probes there and discovered it was, in fact, a hellhole, which could not support any kind of life. And suddenly the aliens came from further out in the solar system. We sent probes there. We didn't find them, and on it goes. It's a phenomenon that changes with our times. And I find that fascinating, Right now, the claims are that they come from the nearest stars, I think. Once we get there, who knows where they'll say they come from.
Somewhere else.
Somewhere else. Inner space, outer space, under the oceans is a big one.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on. I just know that something weird is going on.
Yeah. I know. I really do believe that some do come from under the ocean. That's
well, I mean, USOs are very widely reported, unidentified submerged objects seen rising from the water and sinking into the water. So I don't find that to be impossible at all. What better place to hide, right? We know more about the depths of our galaxy than we do the depths of our own oceans.
Very true. Now, you do the daytime paramedic. Paramedic. Wow, I'm real good today. have you ever gone into a place and they've told you that it's been haunted, or the person is saying they're seeing things, and then you investigate afterwards and it is or it isn't, or
If it's anywhere I'd ever go into in my medical capacity, I wouldn't touch it as an investigator. I just think that you are crossing an ethical boundary there.
right.
Um, and I try very hard to keep those two aspects of my life separate. Even though I think TV-wise, most known for Haunted Hospitals and Paranormal 911.
Mhm.
Usually there, I'm giving commentary and opinion. I think you have to be very careful letting a medical position cross over into the paranormal realm in your everyday world.
Hmm.
So I try and keep those two aspects of my life somewhat separated.
Very good. Very good. It's probably the best thing.
Yeah, because I like my job and I'd like to keep doing it.
Yes. Yes, I could understand that, because the people are still not that accepting of things. So
Well, and I get that too. I mean, everyone has different beliefs, and the last thing you want to do in somebody's worst day, which is usually when they call paramedics, is start spouting off about things that many people still don't believe in. It's just not appropriate. So I leave that well alone. And I've been recognized once or twice, and which has been a little jarring, honestly, from the TV by patients. But generally, I try and let that fly under the radar.
okay.
Do you have any upcoming investigations or events?
I've a ridiculous number of investigations and events coming up this year because I like to be busy. Let's see. I don't want to miss any. So going through my mental schedule, coming up in April, I have got, make sure I get this right, a public event in Massachusetts where I'm kind of on the Revolutionary War Trail. I've one in Tombstone at the end of the month, Tombstone, Arizona, Ghost of the Wild West. I've Sage Paracon in Belgrove, Virginia in May. Waverly Hills Sanatorium, also at the very last weekend in May with Strange Escapes, Amy Bruni's company. They're awesome. Civil War, Shadows of the Shenandoah. We go on the Civil War Trail in, I believe that's June. And then Paracons like Massachusetts Paracon later this fall. Dragon Con in Atlanta, Michigan Paracon later this year as well. I know I'm missing some. And Phenomicon in Utah, which is more of a UFO kind of thing. So those are just the ones I have handy right now. There will be more.
Very good.
Well, are you going to be a speaker, or you're going to do it like an investigation, or is it just a meet and greet altogether?
We tend to do like all of the above. At those events, I usually will present on something. I will, many of them, there is a paranormal investigation I get to help guide people on, which is always fun. Get to open people's, when they bring along skeptical family members, it's always good to sometimes open somebody's eyes to a broader world. So I'll do that as well. And yeah, there's a meet and greet. I very much enjoy sitting down and, listening to people's paranormal experiences at the end of the day at an event like that. Oh, Autographs, the charity event that's coming up at the Palmer House in Minnesota. That is coming up in May, I believe, also.
And what's that charity event for?
That's run by a chap called Tim Miley, and it supports animal shelters and charities, which
yes.
is a charity very dear to my heart.
Yes.
He's a very nice guy.
He is, and does great work in this field. Has studied and helped so many animals with his event. So hats off to him.
Is there any place you haven't investigated that you'd love to go to?
Oh, so many. The White House at the top of my bucket list. Alcatraz. I've always wanted to do Alcatraz. My friends Brad and Barry Kling have been to Alcatraz, and they speak very highly of it. Those are probably the two biggest ones on my bucket list. The White House because of its rich history, and I'm a big Abraham Lincoln.
Yes, I was going to say, well, I mean, all the seances he had there, and people still claim to see him and his wife. So that's one on my bucket list too. I think that's great.
Yeah, and then Alcatraz, just because of that history it has, you know, it's a rock, it's got that kind of mystique. I would love to spend a night locked in at Alcatraz, and hopefully someday we get to do that.
That'd be great.
And just getting out of Alcatraz is great, right? At the end.
I know. Well, I mean, there's still like theories of what happened to those men that escaped. I wonder I don't know if they escaped or they actually drowned in the water or what happened.
Either is possible. I mean, I know there were some letters that suggested that they did escape.
Yeah.
I kind of think that if you go through all of that and you survive, hats off to you. I know you.
Yeah, they don't deserve to go. You made it.
I'm kind of rooting for you at that point. Yeah.
Very true.
But they were very crafty. Literally, the head and the hair and everything. So yeah.
You kind of have to be if you're going to get out of a place like that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't swim, so I wouldn't make it.
Oh no, that's you right out.
Me too. Yeah. Nope. Well, we wouldn't be there anyway, so not on purpose like that.
Now you investigated a lot of places. Is there like I don't want to say like category, but like one place? Okay, like is it residentials or buildings or jails or something, like one kind of location where you felt or you caught more activity than the other?
I like hospitals and old medical facilities and asylums, and that's mainly because I don't know that I catch more activity there, but I feel like I have an affinity for the people that work there, just because we share the same chosen profession. So when I go to a place like Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Kentucky, you know, I have so much sympathy for the men and women that risk their lives every day to treat patients that are dying of tuberculosis. And I feel that nobody gets into healthcare in order to just get rich, right? Unless maybe you're a plastic surgeon. I think that people get into healthcare because it's a calling and they want to help others. And so I like that mindset and that mentality. And I think it goes some way towards explaining the hauntings, because there have been a fair few abandoned hospitals I've investigated where it seems as though you have medical providers that are still going through their rounds and carrying out their duties. It's that strong sense of duty to their fellow human beings that kind of motivates them. So I really enjoy haunted hospitals. That I would say is my favorite type of location to visit.
And you're being in the medical profession, the energy probably looks, feels safe to you, or to them, you feel safe. So
maybe, I don't know. Certainly we speak the same language. So one of my investigative techniques at those kind of locations is to speak about drugs and drug dosages and treatments that are appropriate to the profession and to the era. And so when you speak the same language, it's a good way to connect with somebody. You know, you can take a nurse from any country and put them in a room with a nurse from any other country, and even though they may not verbally speak the same language, they use the same tools, the same techniques, they think in the same way, so they can connect far more easily than, say, a nurse and an insurance salesman. So I think, connections can happen in that way.
And now I know that you want to visit the White House and get all that information. Is there any other buildings that call to you around the White House? Because I know that supposedly there were very well dug underground tunnels and that led to other buildings from the White House. So
I don't know that anywhere really calls to me in that way. I would love to investigate Ford's Theater, but you have to be very careful and very respectful about locations like that. You know, I think we have to be very careful when we're dealing with tragedy, and there is no shortage of individuals, unfortunately, in the field that are willing to cash in on tragedy if there's something in it for them. For example, speaking about cryptids earlier, we all know about the tragedy that just happened in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And already there are individuals that are trying to pin Mothman sightings on.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, come on, guys, seriously. It's too soon.
Yeah.
It's almost certainly not true. There's no evidence for it.
Yeah.
And you know, these poor souls, I mean, they just died. Their families are still in shock, and you're going to put this stuff out there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, you know, I try and be a little bit delicate when it comes down to those locations where people have met their ends in that way.
Very true.
You know, it's one of the few things that makes me angry in this field. If you want to get results or be successful, however you define success, don't climb on people's tragedy in order to do it.
Very good. Yes, I agree. I think we both agree. Sarah and I both are on that same page.
Now, is there like, I don't want to say like a time frame, but I guess where you feel like it's not that disrespectful anymore? Like, say, okay, this happened in 1920, but so it's good. But this happened in 1999, so maybe it's too soon. 2020, whatever. Is there like a one you go by that you feel that's more respectful? Or
it's a good question, because I don't think you can put a number on it. It's one of those things where, for example, when I wrote about the haunting of Fox Hollow Farm in Indiana, which was the home of a serial killer, the I-70 Strangler, the deaths in that case dated back to the 1990s, and they were very recent. I debated even doing that investigation and writing the book at all. But one of the reasons I really wanted to was that these poor men, many of them remain nameless. Their remains, when they were recovered, were not buried. They're sitting in storage in a university. And so their names have been forgotten. They have been forgotten. They got no closure at all. And that did not sit well with me. So in a case like that, I reluctantly will go in and write a book. I've written books about true crimes that have taken place fairly recently, but I'm very careful about how I do them. To give you another example, though, when I was doing my Great American Ghost Trip a few years ago, which was basically a haunted road trip across the U.S. from the Rocky Mountains to the East Coast and back, one of the stops on the trip was in Scranton, Pennsylvania, where on 9/11 the United Flight 93 crashed in that field. And being a firefighter, but in the past anyway, and being a current paramedic, I'd wanted to pay my respects. And although we were on a ghost hunting trip, as it were, I refused to investigate, and my team agreed with me 100%. It just seems wrong. It seems fundamentally wrong to do that. So we just wanted to go and pay our respects to those that lost their lives and leave. I wouldn't investigate the site of the World Trade Center either. I investigate the site of a mass tragedy today. There are, again, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole, but there are unscrupulous individuals that you wait till a celebrity dies and suddenly they're talking to them and they're putting it on YouTube.
TikTok all over, yes.
And it just sickens me. It absolutely sickens me.
Yes. Too often and too fast, and not enough real to it.
Well, forget about the real thing. It's the disrespect of it, period. That's probably the worst part of it.
Yes, I would agree. It shows no respect to the individuals that have lost their lives and to their loved ones that are still learning to process it. So that is without a doubt the slimy side of our field.
Very true. And I know you say you don't cross streams, but I just was wondering if you ever gone to a place and you have experienced somehow a spirit there, like things fall off the wall or the shelves while you're treating the patient.
Nope, never had that happen. And frankly, when I'm at work, my job is my patient and my attention belongs on them. So what brain power I have is focused on what's wrong with them, how can I make it better, how might they get worse, what is my plan if they deteriorate. That's what paramedics are for.
Right.
So, frankly, you could put me in the most haunted house on the planet, and if I'm working, I'm focused entirely on that human being in front of me that needs my help, because I owe them that, and nothing less.
It's very noble. Not too many people, I'm sorry to say, are as dedicated as you.
I think millions of medical professionals are. I'm not particularly special. That's the way we're trained, and that's the way we're wired. We're there to take care of people. So that's our focus. That's our priority when we are in uniform and on duty.
Now, you mentioned you were going to write, or you're doing research on cryptic, but is there any other books that you're thinking about maybe writing down the line, or you have some ideas, some brainstorms?
I have 8 books in various stages of development right now, and 3 of them contracted. So that list of books is kind of already forming. I just released a book about the haunting of Ashmore Estates a couple of weeks ago. My next book will be about Whispers Estate in Indiana, Mitchell, Indiana, a doctor's residence that is, for many years, has been claimed to be the scene of a dark haunting. So that will be my next book. And I have several others kind of in various stages of planning. So I usually roll from one manuscript into the next fairly quickly.
Oh, wow.
Very good. Is there any particular place that you have written about that has surprised you or made it more memorable?
It surprised me.
Yes, gave you, like, you were researching and something came up that you didn't even had any idea about.
Well, I think one of the more interesting ones was Fort Mifflin on the Delaware River, near Philadelphia, because that is a Revolutionary War era fort. So it goes all the way back to the War of Independence. So hundreds of years old. The British built it. The Continental Army occupied it, and it's known as the fort that saved America. And so the siege of Fort Mifflin was a very bloody and miserable affair. And I was really pleased and surprised that they would give an English guy the keys to basically a national treasure. And so when I moved in, I was fully expecting to find that this was a Revolutionary War era haunting and things of that nature. And what I found actually was that it was more layered, that you have spirits from the Civil War as well as the Revolutionary War, and that, Fort Mifflin played a role during both World Wars. It was open way past the Vietnam War, even as a facility. And it sits right next to what was the Philadelphia Navy Yard, where the Philadelphia experiment took place. So there's a whole lot of layer and nuance there. And sometimes you go in with your blinders on and you expect to write one type of book and find out that actually it's more complex than that. So Fort Mifflin, I recommend if anyone is in the area. It is right next to Philadelphia Airport. I highly recommend visiting, not just for the history, but for the very rich haunted history that location has.
Is there a place you investigated that you'd like to investigate again, and why?
Yeah, and there are some places that I feel very much drawn to because they have a family feel to them. One is Asylum 49 in Utah. Another is Malvern Manor in Iowa, an old nursing home. Both of them I've written books about, and both of them I'm very fond of the ghosts and the living human beings that walk those halls and keep the places alive, as it were. So those are my two kind of must return to locations. I'll be visiting both of them again before the year is out. I can guarantee it.
Oh, nice.
Very nice.
Is there a maybe like a, didn't have to be a historical figure, but just a person in general that maybe you were doing research on for a book, and you kind of just really felt really drawn to the person and their story the more you were doing research on them? It
has to be Lincoln, which is strange for a British boy like me, but I was just at the Lincoln Log Cabin this past weekend in Illinois. I was able to visit Lincoln's tomb. Something about the man has just always fascinated me. He's very complex, and so many things about him we just don't realize. You know, one example is that Lincoln was a rail splitter. He was a very strong man physically, and was proud of his ability to hold an axe out for like 5-10 minutes in front of him without his arm wavering. He's immensely strong and had that kind of folksy countryside wisdom. He was brought up about as rural as it gets, and used to work hard and then lay under trees with books that he borrowed, giving himself an education. So I find Lincoln an inspiration just as a human being. And the more I learn about that man and walk in his footsteps, the more impressed I am.
Yeah, I believe I read too, if I'm not mistaken, that he said he had an encounter with an alien too, or something like that. Or so I'm not sure.
That's news to me. But
unless I'm being mistaken with another president, but I think it was a Lincoln who said that. Don't kill me. Now I'm questioning myself.
No, I agree with you, Sarah.
But Lincoln certainly had his brushes with what we would call the paranormal. I mean, he had this dream right before his assassination of him being in the boat, you know, going through the darkness. He dreamed about a White House where everything was set up for mourning, and you know, he could hear people saying the president is dead. And yet, you know, despite all of the many death threats against him, he kept on keeping on, and he kept doing what he did, which it's hard to fathom the incredible pressure Lincoln was under. The pressure to, you know, emancipate the slaves was one that he imposed on himself. The pressure to not emancipate the slaves was very real. The fact that he would see all of these Union boys and, you know, Confederate boys too, that he felt somewhat responsible for the fact that they were dying in the thousands and then tens of thousands, losing legs, losing eyes, arms, all those kind of things. The fact that he was even able to keep going under that kind of stress, you know, and we worry about when someone unfriends us on Facebook. Different times, different people. And obviously we're not going to discuss politics on this show, but I think we can agree that leaders of that caliber are kind of a thing of the past, right?
Yeah.
And so I look back at men like Lincoln and Winston Churchill with a degree of kind of awe at what they achieved.
Now going to like the psychic part, and I guess like it would be paranormal too. Do you think that he did have a gift? Because, you know, he did kind of predict that his passing and stuff like that, and he did believe again in the paranormal and doing the seances at the White House and stuff. Do you think he was gifted?
That's a great question. I don't know about that. I know that most of the seance related activity was down to Mary Todd Lincoln rather than Abraham Lincoln. And he was a man that kicked into high gear after the death of their son. And the Lincolns were a family that, you know, even before his assassination, they were cursed with tragedy in more ways than one. And I think, you know, with the birth of spiritualism, we usually see spiritualism resurge after there is great loss of life. We saw it with the Civil War. We saw it in the First World War and the Second World War. People turn to this idea of communicating with the dead by some means for comfort. And that's been cyclical, hasn't it, throughout history? So I think to a degree there was an element of that in the seances going on in the White House. Queen Victoria really became fascinated with the subject after the loss of her beloved Prince Albert. She never recovered from that emotionally. So I don't know if Lincoln was gifted, but it's easy to see why exploring those questions would have appeal to him.
Yeah. He was an Aquarius. He was going to know about this stuff. What do you feel? How do you feel about divination work with the paranormal? Do you think that they kind of it coincides? There's parallels. Do you ever use any of that when you do an investigation, or have a friend or one of your, people you do investigations with?
Divination meaning?
Like, say, like maybe you want a tarot card or a tea leaf
Oh,
reading, whatever.
So, some of what we would tend to call new age, except it really tends to be old age stuff when you delve
Yeah.
I'm when I investigate, I used to be very much an equipment gearhead kind of guy, and I think that was very short-sighted and myopic because the more time you spend looking down at screens, the less you spend engaging with the location.
Yes.
And that's true just generally, right? On the other hand, you can't entirely go to the other end of let the pendulum swing the other way and do everything based upon crystals and pendulums and talking balls.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a happy medium, pun very much intended. And so I like working with individuals that are sensitive. I like working with individuals that use some of these more esoteric methods. And I also like working with individuals that will open a case with more electronics in it than the average branch of Radio Shack. I think there's room for that integrated approach. And I think that comes from, firstly, years of experience of doing this, but secondly, medicine. When somebody is being treated today, we use what's called a multimodal approach. And that means if you are dealing with chronic pain, we're not simply going to give you a pill and be done with it. There are multiple different treatment methods to use, and they can be synergistic. They can work better together than they can separately, So most patients have a care team these days. And I think when we investigate, I very much like that approach. As long as everybody plays nice and they need to play nice, then there's room for all these different viewpoints during the course of an investigation. So I don't believe in pinning everything on one single approach.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on apps for investigating? Are you pro apps? You're not? Do you believe that they actually work?
Yeah, it depends on the app. I mean, I've seen some apps that are like ghost detectors, and obviously not the case. There's no such thing as a ghost detector. And if there was, whoever invented it would make a
billionaire already.
And there's a reason they say for entertainment only. I know there is this new generation of AI-driven apps which generate artwork. Here's my caveat when it comes to any app. I did work in IT, but I was a computer network guy. I make computers talk to one another. I would, before I trusted any app, on principle, I would want someone who is an experienced and skilled coder to pick that code apart line by line and tell me what's going on under the hood. Because I want to know why the app wants to use my camera, my microphone. What is it? Is it digging into my location? Is the app smart enough to say, hey, according to Richard's GPS, he's at this hospital, so I'm going to start throwing out words like, doctor, nurse. I'm not saying that is happening. I'm saying I would want someone experienced in software design to make sure that isn't the case with any app.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what is your to-go gadget then? Paranormal equipment that you normally like to use or you prefer to use when you do an investigation?
I think going back to the earliest days of the Victorian kind of paranormal investigators, they didn't have the array of gadgets that we did. So the first thing they had was a willingness to ask skeptical questions, which is priceless. And you can't just buy it off the shelf at a paranormal store. You have to hone it and train it and be open to it. So I think having an inquiring mind and a willingness to ask the hard questions is the single most important thing, and a willingness to accept that you might be wrong. Then I come to things as simple as a notepad and a pen, the ability to draw diagrams. When we come to measuring stuff, I'm a big believer in, sure, you want to get temperature baselines. K2 meters are great for helping figure out where the utility lines come into the building. They are not ghost detectors. REM pods are interesting if you put them in a Faraday cage, because you need to make sure that that passing police car isn't setting it off with its radio. And then being a writer and wanting to know everything all the time, I always have 4 or 5 digital voice recorders on any investigation. So I love telling people that are new to this and want to get into the paranormal. I love telling them you don't need to break the bank to do this.
Yeah.
You can spend $100 or at most a couple of $100 and have a reasonable amount of equipment. Far more important is the way you approach the subject and the way you think.
Yeah, I think using simple things like old school like recorders and stuff, sometimes that can give you more evidence than, one of those really expensive machines that you get. Yeah.
And I credit a man called John Tenney with this, and I hope you're familiar with John's work. John epitomizes old school, and he insists on using an analog tape recorder alongside a digital voice recorder, because he quite rightly points out that they actually imprint sound in a very different way. It's different imprinting a recording on an analog tape than in a series of ones and zeros on a tiny hard drive. So you could put those two gadgets side by side and get an EVP in one and not on the other. Yep. So, old school doesn't mean necessarily that we should throw it out or not use it.
Right. Well, we're almost coming near the end of the show. Is there anything else that we haven't spoken about that you want to talk about or you want to tell our audience?
The only thing I want to tell the audience is, we're all in the paranormal field. We all see the same social media. Let's all be nicer and kinder to one another than we have been, huh?
Yeah. Can you tell the audience where we can purchase your books or where we can catch you for your upcoming events?
Sure. My books you can find in your local, like Barnes and Noble if you're in the US, or in the UK, Waterstones, your brick and mortar bookstores. You can also find them at the usual online retailers. You can find me at a whole bunch of events, and I post those events over on my social media. So whether it's on Twitter, I'm not calling it X yet.
That's really uncomfortable, right?
Where or on my Facebook page, Richard Estep Author. So there are a whole bunch of those coming up, and I'll keep those flyers regularly posted. And if you are watching and you come along to one of those events, be sure to swing by and say hi, and let's talk some paranormal, because it's my favorite thing to do.
Yay! Thank you so much for being a wonderful guest. We appreciate you coming on.
Thanks for the invitation, ladies. I appreciate it.
And it's wonderful and refreshing to hear how you are and that you strive for that. It's a good dedication. Great to see in someone, not just the way they've been acting lately. So
thank you. Most mornings I strive to just get out of bed on the right side. So take the wins where you can find them, right?
Which way? Thank you very much. And as always, thank you to our audience. Thank you, MoonGirl. And we love you all, and many blessings. Bye.